Empires have drawn the borders, languages, and even the foods we take for granted today. Yet most of us only know scattered fragments of a few of them. In this video, we're touring history's greatest empires, from ancient Persia to the British Empire, looking at exactly how each one rose to power, how it actually governed millions of people, and what finally brought it crashing down. Watching them side by side reveals some surprisingly familiar patterns in how power is built and lost. Around 550 BCE, a Persian king named Cyrus the Great began stitching together the largest empire the world had ever seen, eventually stretching from Egypt and Turkey all the way to the Indus River in modern Pakistan. What made Persia special wasn't just its size, it was how it governed. Instead of crushing conquered peoples, Cyrus let them keep their own laws, languages, and religions, as long as they paid taxes and stayed loyal. A strategy of tolerance that was radical for its time. The empire ran through provinces called satrapies, each managed by a governor called a satrap, connected by the incredible royal road and a relay of horseback messengers that could carry news thousands of miles in about a week. Persia eventually weakened after a long rivalry with Greece drained its resources, and in 331 BCE, Alexander the Great marched in and toppled the last Achaemenid king. Even after its fall, Persia's model of tolerant, multicultural rule influenced nearly every empire that came after it. The Roman Empire officially began in 27 BCE, when Augustus became the first emperor, turning a sprawling republic into a one-man-ruled superpower that eventually wrapped around the entire Mediterranean Sea. At its peak, Rome controlled roughly 5 million square kilometers and tens of millions of people, held together by an extraordinary network of roads, aqueducts, and a professional army of legions stationed on the frontiers. Roman law, language, and engineering were so effective that they still shape modern life, from the alphabet you're reading to the concept of written legal codes. But an empire that big was hard to manage from one city, so it eventually split into a western and an eastern half. The Western Roman Empire crumbled under economic troubles, political chaos, and waves of migrating peoples like the Goths and Vandals, finally ending in 476 CE when a Germanic general deposed the last emperor in Italy. The eastern half, however, didn't fall at all. It just kept going under a new name. When people say Rome fell in 476, they usually mean only the western half. The eastern half, centered on the glittering city of Constantinople, kept the Roman torch burning for another 1,000 years, as what historians now call the Byzantine Empire. Founded when Emperor Constantine relocated the capital eastward in 330 CE, this empire gradually became more Greek-speaking and deeply Orthodox Christian, even as it still called itself Roman. Byzantium became a bridge between East and West, preserving classical Greek and Roman texts and building dazzling architecture like the massive domed church of Hagia Sophia, all while fending off invaders for centuries thanks to Constantinople's nearly impenetrable walls. Its economy thrived on trade, since the city sat at the crossroads of routes linking Europe and Asia. Over time, Crusader attacks, plague, and rising Ottoman power wore the empire down to little more than the city itself. In 1453, Ottoman cannons finally breached those legendary walls, and the last Roman emperor died fighting in the streets, closing a chapter that stretched back to ancient Rome. After the Prophet Muhammad died in 632, his followers rapidly expanded the Muslim community into a vast political empire known as the Caliphate, ruled by a caliph who was both a religious and political leader. The first major dynasty, the Umayyads, pushed the empire's borders from Spain in the west to the edges of India in the east in less than a century, an astonishingly fast expansion. Power later shifted to the Abbasid dynasty, who moved the capital to Baghdad and presided over a golden age of science, medicine, mathematics, and trade. translating and preserving Greek and Persian knowledge that later flowed back into Europe. The Caliphate governed through local administrators, Islamic law, and relatively tolerant treatment of Jewish and Christian communities who paid a special tax. Over time, the empire fragmented into rival regional dynasties as distant governors declared independence. The Abbasid Caliphate's political power was finally shattered when Mongol armies sacked Baghdad in 1258, though the cultural legacy of this era shaped the Islamic world for centuries afterward. In 1206, a warrior named Temujin united the fractured Mongol tribes and took the title Genghis Khan, launching one of the fastest and largest conquests in human history. Within a few decades, Mongol horsemen using incredible mobility, discipline, and terrifying siege tactics had built the largest contiguous land empire ever to exist, stretching from Korea to Eastern Europe. Despite their fearsome reputation in battle, the Mongols governed with surprising pragmatism, guaranteeing safe trade along the Silk Road, allowing religious freedom, and adopting useful ideas from the cultures they conquered. A period of relative safety, often called the Pax Mongolica. But an empire this enormous couldn't stay unified forever, and after Genghis Khan's death, his descendants split it into 4 separate khanates that increasingly fought each other. Without a single strong center, the pieces gradually weakened, got absorbed by regional powers, or transformed into other states like the Yuan dynasty in China. Still, the Mongols permanently reshaped trade, disease spread, and even genetics across Eurasia. The Ottoman Empire began around 1299 as a small Turkish frontier state in Anatolia. But it grew steadily by absorbing Byzantine territory until, in 1453, it captured Constantinople itself and turned it into its glittering new capital, Istanbul. At its height, the Ottomans controlled a huge swath of territory across southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, ruled by a sultan who was both a political leader and, for much of its history, the Caliph of Islam. The empire managed its incredibly diverse population through the millet system, letting different religious communities like Christians and Jews run their own internal affairs, while paying taxes to the central government. Ottoman power also relied on an efficient army, including the elite Janissary Corps, and control of key trade routes between Europe and Asia. Over the following centuries, the empire struggled to keep up militarily and economically with an industrializing Europe, slowly losing territory in a long decline nicknamed the Sick Man of Europe. Picking the losing side in World War I proved fatal, and the empire was formally dissolved in 1922, giving way to the modern Republic of Turkey. The Aztec Empire began in 1428, when 3 city-states in central Mexico formed a triple alliance and started conquering their neighbors together. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a dazzling city built on an island in a lake, complete with canals, causeways, floating farms called chinampas, and a population that may have rivaled the largest cities in Europe at the time. Rather than directly administering conquered lands, the Aztecs mostly demanded tribute, goods, food, and sometimes captives for religious ceremonies, while letting local rulers stay in charge as long as they paid up. This made the empire fast to expand, but also fragile, since many conquered peoples deeply resented Aztec rule and were eager for a chance to rebel. That chance came when Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519 and allied with thousands of these resentful local groups. Combined with devastating European diseases like smallpox sweeping through the population, this alliance allowed Cortés to conquer Tenochtitlan by 1521, ending the empire in just 2 years. The British Empire grew slowly, starting in the early 1600s, with trading companies like the East India Company setting up outposts overseas, and it eventually became the largest empire in human history, covering roughly a quarter of the world's land and people at its peak in the early 20th century. Britain governed its colonies in very different ways depending on the place, sometimes ruling directly with British officials, and sometimes governing indirectly through local rulers who answered to a British overseer. The empire's power rested on naval dominance, industrial manufacturing, and global trade networks that moved everything from tea and cotton to enslaved people during the brutal transatlantic slave trade. This system generated enormous wealth for Britain, while often devastating local economies, cultures, and populations in the colonies. After two exhausting world wars left Britain financially drained, and as independence movements grew stronger across Asia and Africa, the empire rapidly unraveled, with India gaining independence in 1947 and dozens of other colonies following over the next few decades. Today, its legacy lives on in language, borders, and institutions across more than 50 countries, for better and for worse. From Cyrus the Great to the fall of the British Empire, these 8 superpowers show us that no empire, no matter how vast, lasts forever. They all eventually face the same pressures of overreach, rebellion, and change. If you enjoyed this tour through history's rise and fall stories, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the empires, wars, and civilizations that shaped our world.